Okay. Jesus is a very interesting person, and we find that some people want to listen to Jesus. So think of the crowd of people at the start of the service. John said last week they nearly squished him because they were so keen to come and see Jesus and hear him. Jesus has to get in a boat so that he's not squished. And think of his disciples who leave everything they know to follow him so that they can listen to his every word. They want to listen to Jesus. But not everybody in the world wants to listen to Jesus. So last week, the grown-ups saw that the religious teachers in Jesus' time, they wanted to kill Jesus. That's how much they wanted him to shut up so they didn't have to listen. And even Jesus' own family, we saw last week, thought that Jesus was a crazy person who's not worth listening to. And isn't it strange? We have such good news to tell other people about Jesus, and some of them want to listen, but other people really don't. And Jesus tells this story about the sower who sows the seed to help us to remember two things when things like that happen. And the first thing is this: be realistic. When we tell people about Jesus, some of them won't listen to us. When we tell people about Jesus, some of them won't listen. Jesus says that his good news, the word about him, is like a seed that gets scattered out to all different types of people. Just like we threw out the starburst earlier. And people will react to his good news in 4 different ways. Now, I think that the disciples are supposed to be the farmer. After all, Jesus wanted them to go and tell people the good news and spread and scatter the good news about him. And so he commissioned them to go and preach the word about him. So they're the ones who are going to be doing the scattering, aren't they? But doesn't it also sound a little bit like us too? Doesn't Jesus want us to go and tell other people the good news about Jesus? The news about Jesus is great news. And our friends at school and at our clubs and at mummy and daddy's friends from work or their sports clubs or whatever they do, they all need to hear Jesus' good news. So the disciples are like the farmer, but so are we. And the good news is what we have to scatter. And yet, like the different soils in the story, different people will respond to Jesus in different ways. So some people will be like the path. Do you remember what happened over here with the path when the seed was scattered? Quick as a flash, the devil swoops in like a bird and snatches it away. And so when we tell others about Jesus, some of them will just not seem to care at all. They won't be interested, and it won't sink in. It will be snatched away. Some people will be like the rocky place in the back corner over there. Do you remember what happened there when the seed was scattered? It looked promising for a moment, didn't it? They thought, Jesus is great news. Yeah, I like Jesus. I think he's great. I think church is great. But that is as deep down as it seemed to go. And deep down, they don't let Jesus change them. They might say Jesus is my friend. They might say, Jesus is my teacher. But they wouldn't say, Jesus is my king. And so when trouble or persecution came and burned them like that scorching sun, they'd give up. It's worth saying that could be a particular hazard for churchgoers, couldn't it? Jesus says we might expect that some people here like him as their friend, they like him as a teacher, but they wouldn't call Jesus their king. I wonder if that's you. That kind of soil will never produce fruit, says Jesus. Some are like the soil covered in thorny weeds. Do you remember what happened over here when the seed was scattered? It seemed promising for a moment as well. They heard Jesus' word, they like it, but then other things come along. Life can be so difficult, can't it? There can be so many things to worry about, like school and friends, toys, money, work, family. These things can distract us. They can twist around us like thorns until Jesus' words get choked out. I think actually everybody in this room is in danger of having worries and distractions choke Jesus' word from us, because we all have things to be worried and distracted about. But just like the plants in our garden, they need to soak in the nutrients and outgrow the thorns and the weeds so that they're not threatened by them anymore. And a good gardener will even feed the plants and weed out the thorns. Well, it's important for us to be proactive, soaking in Jesus' word, so that when we do face those worries and distractions, we won't be choked. So that's the first thing to remember. Be realistic. When we tell people about Jesus, some won't listen. We have to expect those kind of reactions. So you might tell your friends about Jesus and they might not become a Christian. Now I wonder, did anybody get to the last question? Whose fault is it when the plants in the story don't grow? Jojo? You thought it was all of them? I think to an extent, you're right. There's different people involved. However, I think that it's the soil's fault mostly, because you've got the 4 soils, and if one of them grows, I mean, the good soil still had birds, there would still be weeds and worries and distractions, but the good soil grew and produced a crop. So even though the birds are a bit responsible and the sun's a bit responsible and the thorns are a bit responsible, in the end it was the soil that mattered. Does that make sense? When you tell someone the gospel and they react in one of those ways, remember... Yes, Sarah? You could argue that it's the farmer's fault about where he scatters them. He doesn't know where things are going to grow and where they're not. When you next tell someone the gospel and they react in one of those ways, remember this, it's not your fault. Just like I don't think it was really the farmer's fault in the story. You do the right thing. In fact, you do a very kind and loving thing when you tell your friends and other people about Jesus. So it's not your fault if you tell people about Jesus and they don't respond. It's also not the word's fault, just like it wasn't the seed's fault in the story. The word about Jesus is really good news. It's good news that can rescue us. There's no better news in the world, and it's true. It's the truth. And so you do the right thing when you spread and scatter it and tell other people. Well, that's the first thing this morning. Be realistic. When we tell people about Jesus, some of them won't listen. Very quickly, the second thing is this. Be realistic. When we tell people about Jesus, some will listen. So just as we finish, let's remember the good soil over here. Do you remember what happened when we scattered the seed in this area? When we scatter the good news of Jesus, there will be people who hear it and accept it. They will really take it in. And in fact, they will become Christians. Now, we don't always see the results of this. And sometimes the growing can take a long, long time. But sure enough, they will grow and they will start to live a fruitful life. So we have to be realistic. Some people will become Christians when we tell them the gospel. God's power guarantees it. Isn't it wonderful that God would let Christ Church Redbourne help him in spreading the good news and changing people's lives for the better and for all eternity? What a great motivation to go out and tell people about Jesus. So when you tell the gospel, some won't become Christians. Maybe even the majority will not become Christians. But you can be darn sure that some will. So Christ Church Redbourne, keep on telling. I'm going to hand back over to Annika.